Ink-a-dink, 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 ink-a-dink. Wow!
Well, there's been talk floating around about the floating a surprise with Jeb Bush.
That's part of Basil's prediction.
And maybe Chris Christie running as VP.
Basil says you're right, but in the wrong direction.
Oh.
Okay, let's get it moving again. Okay, but I need to have a caller in first.
But you never know. We'll see.
Okay, we're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. Basil, is your hair in place? Is my hair in place? We're all good? We're all looking good, you think? Okay. Because I know how fastidious you are about your co-host's appearance. Okay. We're not ready to start quite yet, but Basil BuddhaCat Presents. We're not actually on the air yet, so you can, if you want to call back in a little bit later. Basil, it's Elsie. I'm guessing that because all I'm hearing is mooing in the background on the line. Elsie, if that's you, Basil says Basil's not taking any animal calls this week. He's got a tiger scheduled on in the near future, and he also has, as he's well noted, he's also got a group coming on to play some music. And the group that Basil met along the way, it's a group they call themselves Obama Romney. And I brought some information back from, okay. Sorry. Welcome to Basil BuddhaCat Presents. My name is David Stevenson. Good morning. Happy Sunday morning. And with us again, carrying over from our Friday show, is, of course, Basil BuddhaCat, center slot, the star of the show, the host of the show. And with us again, Mark Albertson.
Hello.
We're talking about, and Mark, of course, is the resident historian of Progressive Soup, who have graciously lent him to Basil for these two shows, and very appreciative of that. Basil's not sure right now how appreciative he is of it, because he and Mark had a disagreement in Friday night's show. They were talking about President Obama, and they were talking about Mark's contention that President Obama is a very corporate candidate, and perhaps wasn't even in favor of single payer from jump when the great healthcare debate took place back in 2009, 2010. But get over it, Basil. We're here to find common ground. He says, no, that's your shtick on your show. He doesn't have to find common ground with anybody. He's going to say what he's going to say. And would anybody else, now remember, it's Sunday, he whispered, everybody else and their opinions be damned. But he's taking that back because it's the Sunday morning show. Now, as you know, Basil, very much like myself, considers themselves we both consider ourselves to be devout Christians religiously, and Buddhists philosophically. And Basil is earnest in his belief that there is nothing inconsistent about being a Christian religiously and a Buddhist philosophically, because in fact Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, and the Buddha both conducted themselves in very similar manners, very similar fashions, and passed along a very fine, very strong blueprint on how to conduct ourselves in our daily lives and how to be better people. And Basil's okay. You want to say it differently this time? Basil says that anybody that wants to disagree with him on that, he'll take you on even with a couple of whiskers tied behind his ear, maybe even a paw tied behind his back. Basil believes in the pacifist nature, but he's also willing to stand up for his beliefs, and that's just how he is, and we'll accept that. Okay. Now we were talking when we broke off for the Friday night show. We were discussing. What were we discussing?
We were discussing Barack Obama.
Okay. Yep.
Right.
Now Basil, we're going to get back into your question of Mark Albertson, our guest, about Barack Obama, and we want to hear a little bit more about. Basil wants you to make that, to draw that comparison between the two skinny senators from Illinois who became president, and how, in Basil's mind's eye, they both did some things during their administrations that were contrary to what they believe in, but they did them in order to try to heal some of the wounds that had been brought upon America by history, by incidents in history. In case of President Lincoln, the Civil War, which was promised to him as an inauguration gift by the South, by the southern states. But in the case of 2008 going forward, President Obama was dealt a hand which was a pretty tough one, not necessarily by the previous administration, although he was saddled with the task of getting us out of Iraq and also solving the quagmire in Afghanistan. But we had a little stock market meltdown, a little financial meltdown in August of 2008. And Basil wants, you want Mark to talk about that too. You want him to go back in history and talk about the meltdown in 2008, August 2008, and how it impacted President Obama's handling of the economy and how things he's done during his administration. So the floor is yours.
Well, if you go back to 2008, you had the so-called financial meltdown. Barack Obama was better able to carry that program forward than John McCain or Sarah Palin. Mm-hmm. The Bush administration was not looked upon fondly when it left office in the general population. And the bank bailout, which is essentially what it was, could only be put forward, really, in essence, by a fellow with Obama's stature. Now, here's a man who's tall, good-looking, speaks well, is kind of a new kid on the block. He's black. This is a vindication of the civil rights struggle, which really it's not.
Yeah, Basil. He's black. Basil said he never noticed that before. And Basil's saying that, in fact, he's the only president that he's ever actually seen because he actually. Basil says he's the only president that he's ever recognized because of the dark nature of his skin. Basil's saying all these white dudes just didn't do it for him. So he hadn't noticed it before. You hadn't, huh? Okay, go on.
He's colorblind.
Well, maybe, because in fact, as Kristen well notes, Basil has his laser light that sends out a bolt of a little dot of red wherever you point it.
Right.
Basil really likes that laser light, and I've read that the cats really, in fact, the only color that they see is actually red. It's the only color which actually impacts itself on a cat's vision. But go ahead about President Obama.
Right, and you're going to have a man like Obama who's going to be able to put that bank bailout through because he's actually appealing.
Yep.
Obama also kept Bernard Bernanke back in at the Fed. Mm-hmm. You have to maintain a continuity here, or people start asking questions. Mm-hmm. So Obama kept this going. So he was part of this corporate arrangement too to bail out the banks, which in turn have not bailed out the American public.
Clearly,
the economy is still in the doldrums, and it's really not going to pick up. I mean, Obama has bitten into this agenda where the you know, a lot of these jobs have gone overseas. In fact, since George Bush Jr. took office, we've lost 42,000 factories or production production facilities overseas, and those jobs aren't coming back. Eventually, they will, because they want to reduce the standard of living in this country 10, 20, 30, 40%.
Oh, in other words, when the American standard of living is lower, perhaps, let's say, than other countries, then other countries will send their work here because they can have it done cheaper here.
Well, maybe not as low as other standard of living, but lower than it is now to bring production back. I mean, you could, if you want to speculate here, you could see a resurgence in production here once the standard of living has been reduced. Much like you saw in the Soviet Union when Stalin realized war was coming and he forced industrialization of the Soviet Union. People were paid not paid well. They paid more money for shoddy goods, and the surplus value was pumped back into the economy. Surplus value that's what surplus value is in Marxist parlance. You pump the value that you make back into the economy. Now that is something that could very well happen here if people want their jobs back. You know, they're investing this money overseas. We bailed out the banks, the tax breaks to the rich. These big companies, some of them are paying no taxes. Like we know GE didn't pay taxes, ExxonMobil,
for many
correct?
years, yeah.
Right, and they made billions and billions of dollars, and that money is not being invested here. It's being invested overseas. And the idea here is, yeah, if you want these jobs back, you're going to have to lower the standard of living. I mean, why would they want to pay somebody making a lot of money here when they can pay somebody in China who's not making as much money? You know, make the deal with the Chinese, and that's what's happened here. And Obama's part of this program. So.
Okay.
Another thing, I mean, he puts Jeffrey Immelt to solve the employment problem. You know, GE's got most of their jobs overseas. You're going to ask the CEO of a company that does that to solve the employment problem here? I don't see where that washes.
Okay. Basil's he's following you. Okay. Although he did roll his eyeballs once or twice, but no disrespect meant, I'm sure, but he flipped his whiskers. Disrespect meant sorry.
I mean, it's the same thing with the education system, too. I mean, you want to educate children so they can make a better life for themselves. If that's the case, then how come we're privatizing a lot of the education system? I mean, like I mentioned earlier, you know, there was there's a school in Norwalk today that's having this rally, try your best for the test. I mean, to me, school rallies are for generating you know, this feeling for the school or the sports team or something to that effect. Do your best on a test. I mean, we're teaching to a test. I mean, it's a question of what we want in this country. Do we want, as a people, do we want our children to be educated well, or do we want the best tested morons in the Western world? And I remember I gave a talk at the Milford Library several years ago on Battleship Connecticut and the Great White Fleet, and I talked to. I got buttonholed by this teacher, a retired history teacher from the New Haven school system, had been retired 2 years at the time. And I'm against the marginalization of history, civics, and geography in the schools. I think the kids should know the history, so we don't repeat the same mistakes. However, this teacher, who was a 30-year teaching vet, told me, he says, you know, we're graduating today? He says, today we are graduating history-conscious idiots, geographical illiterates, and civic-minded morons. This is a teacher that told me that. And this is one of those assessments that's hidden between the eyes, right in the breadbasket, no-nonsense approach. And largely he's correct. You know, the more we cut back on the schools and marginalize history, civics, and geography, the arts, the science, this type of thing, we are limiting the critical thinking of our young. You know, the Navy SEALs like to pride themselves in getting well-rounded individuals to be a SEAL. And yes, that's fine, but are you going to have a school system that's going to pump out these type of people if we're not doing this? You know, if we're not catering to it, and we're taking money out of this system and giving it to the banks for their own use, you know, and we're not getting this reinvestment in our society. We're just not. You know, the money's going overseas. I mean, these banks can borrow from the Fed at 0.25% interest, and then invest that money overseas, like I mentioned before, Australian bonds where they pay 5, 5.25, 5.5, and then pocket the arbitrage difference and not invest that money into this economy. And Obama's catering to that, apparently. he doesn't seem to be stopping that trend.
Okay, but Basil wants to deviate a little bit from that point of discussion right now, and he has a question that's been bothering him, well, for 17 years, 18 years now. Do the Chinese really eat cats?
I understand it's a delicacy there. That's what I understand. I could be wrong. Dog too, I guess.
Okay, that's Basil says. Of course, we're to differentiate. He says cats are delicate, but they should not be considered a delicacy. In fact, Basil is suspicious about the fact because he sees other cats and he sees himself and he sees the other cats have these long tails. Now his housemate Lilith has a long, fluffy tail. Now, she's a Maine Coon, and she's got a long, fluffy tail. On the other side of the coin, Basil has, well, it's not exactly a nub, and he's going to make sure I don't say the word nub, because it's not a nub. He says it is, in fact, the perfect length tail, but it's about 1 inch long. And, of course, he's also got the rabbit-like legs that you get from a Manx.
Well, that tail won't get tangled up.
He's inclined to agree with you on that. He's never had a problem getting tangled up in his tail, and never had a door slammed on his tail by accident. He's never it never gets in the way of himself when he's you better caution how you say that, Basil. When he's preening himself, let's say, when he's around back, making sure that his nether regions are clean, that the tail never gets in the way. But Basil wants to know. He wants to get back to this notion about. He noticed that on the second show we talked a little bit about Nazi Germany, and Basil has studied in his scholarly works. He has studied a bit about Nazi Germany, and he noted that you knew a tremendous amount about that subject, about the whole how World War II unfolded, how Germany came back out of a very bleak economy for certainly over a decade, and roared back with this notion of nationalism. Basil wants you to talk a little bit about nationalism and the dangers of nationalism. How much nationalism is the right amount? When do you go too far with nationalism? And how do you prevent? Because Basil says he's critical of dogs, for instance. Let's say dogs. One of Basil's pet expressions is "don't get a dog." He says it all the time on the Washington Post when he blogs. It's one of his taglines: "Don't get a dog." Of course, he also adds, "Don't get a dog, especially a Republican. What do you call it? A Republican snark hound." Well, actually, he uses the term that he uses for our cameramen, which I can't repeat on television. People will just have to see it in the closing credits. But it's something about a
muzzle?
The Stanley snark hound. And I think Basil's alluding sometimes when he uses that, he's alluding it to Americans of the right-wing persuasion. But he wants to know, again, he wants to stay on that subject a little while, about nationalism. Talk about nationalism, if you will, and how it can be good for a country, how it can be bad for a country, how you differentiate, and how you stop it from getting from one point to another.
Nationalism is a fascinating concept. It really generated steam during the French Revolution. You see, the Holy Roman Empire, which lasted over 900 years. When Napoleon destroyed it, 1805, 1806, you had this German confederation that he put together, okay. And there were the various German states. And when that happened, the Germans began to get this feeling of togetherness. They began to feel that, we Germans should be one nation. Of course, that fell apart at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, but it was actually kept together as a German confederation after the Congress of Vienna, and it was run by the Austrians and it was run by the Prussians, And then during the course of when you get into the middle of the 19th century, Prussia is eventually going to take over and marginalize the Austrians there. You had a lot of liberal Germans, progressive Germans, German intellectuals who were looking for looking for togetherness. They didn't want the Austrian variety, the Habsburgs, because they were mostly Catholic. That they didn't want. But when Prussia...
Hold that thought. Basil BuddhaCat Presents. I think it's Elsie again, but this time, okay. Okay. Elsie apparently has acquired the ability to speak English a little bit better, and she's got a message for everybody, for the audience. Eat more chicken. Okay. Okay. We appreciate that. Thanks, Elsie. Nothing else to add? Okay, thanks. Okay. Go ahead.
Pushing salmonella today? Is that what they're doing?
I'm not sure, but I can readily understand why Elsie would be keen about more chicken.
But yeah, it's not just the Germans; it was the Italians too. In 1860-61, when the Italian Revolution, they were able to put Italy together. Italian nationalism had grown during the 19th century. The Poles, too. The Poles were looking to have their own nation, too. They would finally get it again in 1918 after the First World War. But Giuseppe Mazzini, the Italian nationalists, always thought that for a new Europe, it should be the Italians, the Germans, and the Poles. And he always thought that the Germans had the intelligence, the wherewithal, the capacity to make this new Europe happen. But the fact of the matter is, when the Prussians, which were more militaristic, were able to unite Germany, and they marginalized the French in European politics, it was actually Chancellor Bismarck who actually kept German nationalism in train by not getting involved in colonies and not building a large navy because he knew it would antagonize the British. But of course, when Kaiser Wilhelm II came along, he dispensed with Bismarck, and that safety valve on virulent German nationalism was undone, and Germany got involved in getting colonies. They got involved with in building a large navy, which Bismarck said not to do because he didn't want to antagonize the British.
Okay, now Basil, he's been looking at me with funny eyes, but. He says he's not really quite sure how you differentiate between different nationalities being, in terms of intelligence, in terms of different attributes that occasionally, he says occasionally you humans occasionally attribute different qualities and levels of intelligence to different nationalities, different ethnic groups, different religious groups, different races. And what in the world, he asks, what in the world makes any of you folks think that you could ever achieve the level of understanding that a cat could have? Now who's being...
Very philosophical here.
Well, yeah, but it's not, he's not being nationalistic, he's being... I don't know.
More of a citizen of the world?
Petinistic? I don't know. He's putting not a race or he's being speciesistic.
Well, I guess nationalism can be a fine thing. I mean, there are people, if you speak the same language, have the same culture, have the same basic beliefs, you have something in common, and that creates a bond. Then perhaps you put together a government to run whatever it is this nation state that you put together. The problem comes in when maybe some nations have more in the way of economic resources. Some nations lack economic resources, and they think to become a world power or to survive that they need to take from someone else. The Japanese could be a case in point here. Yeah. Japan didn't have much in the way of raw materials when they became a more industrialized state. They could get that from places like Korea, Manchuria, places like this. Yeah. So this is where nationalism gets taken to the extreme. And nationalism was really taken to the extreme in Japan in the 20s and the 30s. the Bushido movement, and the more militarist, bringing back the samurai, that kind of thing. And they didn't have much use for other races.
One moment. Basil BuddhaCat Presents. It's Basil. It's Herman Cain. He says he doesn't deliver pizza anymore. He doesn't own the business anymore. Sorry to say. He says he made his fortune there and he's moved on to the political arena. Really? Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. Okay. And with that, we're going to have to wrap up the show. We've had our discussion. This has been Basil BuddhaCat Presents. I'm David Stevenson. I'm Basil's the co-host and interpreter. Basil BuddhaCat, center slot, and our guest, the most esteemed historian that we've ever encountered, truly, Mark Albertson.
Thank you.
And he's been very, very good to both our shows now in terms of shedding light on some very important issues, both nationally, both domestically, both internationally, and on the whole nature of the human race. Thanks. Enjoy your day. Bye. Okay. Now. Okay. Yes. Okay. Just Basil says he wants to have you back because he really at some points a disagreement with you, and that's fine. That's fine.
They say they'd rob your grandma blind on Wall Street, on Wall Street. Fritter her away her Medicare on Wall Street. And Pharma Oil and their pet fox don't care if she lives in a box, so long as they wear platinum jocks on Wall Street, on Wall Street. Meow.